Radical Imagination Project, building creative community.
So once you pass your kind of analysis stage, so on the practical level, you get involved in the tent town. Was that a good example of how you'd apply some of these ideas?
So I got involved with Tent Town the same way as a lot of people did, where they seen that there was this camp in George Square and it had been there for a couple of weeks and it wasn't for moving. So a lot of people approached it and said, well, what's going on here and what's it for? The story at first was that it was a protest against the council because they were closing homeless shelters, they were cutting funding towards projects for homelessness. And homeless people were worse for wear because of the cuts that the council were making. So the way that Tent Town was when I first came across it was there was a gazebo with a kitchen, they were cooking food, making tea and coffee. There were tents for homeless people to sleep in, so they had some sort of shelter. And I kind of wondered, well, what can I do to really add to this? Then it was discovered that the person that had established the camp had been running a dictatorship, had been keeping the public money donated for himself. He wouldn't put that towards the cause of the homeless people to get them supplies or anything they needed. So the people that were there...
So how does this person, was he in charge or something?
Yeah, he openly declared it a few times I was there. And I thought, this is kind of strange that someone would be so open that they were in charge. And at first I didn't want to say anything because I didn't have a full assessment of the situation, because it can always be possible that folk come together to make a project happen, but if everyone but one person doesn't bother to see through their commitment, it may fall to one person to have to see that commitment through. So I didn't want to say, well, you shouldn't do this, because I didn't have a full assessment. So I was there intermittently for a few days, seeing how I could help out. And then on the third day that I was there, it was discovered that what he'd been doing with the publicly donated money, people had been coming up and handing over 40 quid, 100 quid at one time, and he'd been using this money. He'd, bought himself things at a clothes shop and all the rest of it. And so a few of us got together and says, we know what you've been up to, and this can't go on, because if you do this, then you're just as bad as the corrupt council that you say that you are standing against, because it's just entirely corrupt what you've been up to. And the sort of things he says was, well, I've earned this because this is what I've done. And he says, well, you are just like the council because you think you get some sort of reward for being altruistic. But he was told, we're telling you now that as a consensus of everyone here, we're deciding as equals that we're not going to allow this to go on. You're welcome to stay and take part as an equal, but that's the way it'll have to be. He stayed for a while, but ultimately didn't like being an equal, so he left. After the dictatorship was overthrown, we all said to each other, this has to be consensus-based now. Had our first meeting, and the point was raised, okay, we need to agree on some rules about how this should work. And we did things like no drinking drugs in sight, because obviously there's going to be people here who have addiction issues, and that isn't fair in them to be open with each other about the money that's been taken in, how it's spent, all the kind of sensible things that if Tent Town had begun as a long-term sustained project, I think would have been established to begin with. But because it was begun as an underhanded project and that was overthrown, what was left was, well, there's, homeless people are still staying here and they're dependent on having some sort of place. I mean, it's not great, but it's drier and it's a bit safer than they would otherwise have. So we need to try and upkeep that for them. So 2 weeks later, Tent Town was still there, through the mud, through the council trying to prosecute and evict the homeless people from the site. It got to the point where some folk that were volunteering at the site went to the chambers and they said, we're not leaving until either the lawyer or someone with some sort of responsibility comes down and discusses the future of the people that are staying at the site. I think eventually they went to London Road, to the hub. The Simon community stepped in and they agreed to give 25 people temporary housing with a view to permanent housing. and there was 6 people that got tickets back to their home cities, Belfast, Manchester, London, and possibly Liverpool. So I mean that was a success that, under the embarrassment that the council were put under, you know, the gaze of other people staring at them, knowing what they're doing and not doing, crucially. Yeah, a result was achieved. But it has to be said though, you know, after speaking to homeless people, after Tent Town, and bumped into people that were at Tent Town and meant to get permanent housing, it seems that so far we've only found out that there's one person who got to the stage of permanent accommodation. Exactly why is hard to ascertain, because it's a two-way street, because the service is there, it's offered, and I don't know how many people took up the offer. It's difficult to say. But it should always be borne in mind that it doesn't necessarily mean that because that was offered, that's, you know, what became of it.
The opportunity was put in front
Yeah.
of people.
Yeah,
Whether they take it or they don't is entirely up to them. But the fact that it happened,
yeah.
which is quite good. And how do you think this reflects in the Homeless World Cup thing that the council have got, or just finished in the square?
Yeah, duplicity. Because on one hand, the council prosecuted homeless people. They took them to the Sheriff Court to try and get rid of them out of George Square. They offered nothing constructive otherwise until they were really pushed. And it was under, as I say, the embarrassment of the gaze of the public knowing what they were and weren't doing to help the situation. But yet, on the other hand, they welcome an event which is supposed to raise homelessness, and it's supposed to give something constructive to homeless people to help them improve their lives. And this was welcomed and put on the same site that they prosecuted homeless people on. So, as I said on the flyer we handed out at the Homeless World Cup, there's a massive ethical question that remains unclarified, and probably on purpose by the council, about what their stance actually is on homelessness. You really have to read between the lines of the council's actions to get an idea of how they think about homeless people. And that's probably that it's okay to be homeless as long as we say you're allowed. In the homeless, I mean, I've always talking about it. It's been pivotal to separate the Homeless World Cup from the issue of homelessness, especially because if anyone thinks you're out to destroy the Homeless World Cup, but then you have to explain, well, no, there will be good things for the people involved. There's no way we want to take that away from them. But there are, I don't know, I suppose, vignettes of the Homeless World Cup that if you pay attention to, they raise some questions. Particularly in the literature that they hand out, the things that are said by the commentator at the games, and the notices up that you can donate £5 by texting this number, which in itself isn't necessarily a bad thing, because if they need to pull in money to help homeless people, okay, but I'm not entirely sure where the money goes. And the sorts of things in the literature and what the commentators say, maybe every couple of minutes the commentator would reinforce the point. So I'd like to remind everyone that this is the Homeless World Cup, and it's about helping homeless people get on with their lives in a much more constructive way. And I think it's really obvious from what you can see here that that's working. Well, it's not. I mean,
people that you're representing as well.
Oh no, aye.
You know, you can't do things that's going to be harmful to them.
Yeah.
Whether you think it's a good, bad, or whatever.
And knowing that I could then say to other people who asked, well, how did it go? Or if you're introducing people to the story, say, well, it was also the case we got shown out because at the time we were trying to raise awareness about homelessness in the city on a wider scale than just what's confined to George Square and put on as a spectacle.
So how do you think we kind of build in that kind of stuff?
Going forward from Tent Town and raising awareness about it at the Homeless World Cup, I think it's important to, while the weather is more favourable than it usually is, I won't say the summer because, you know, that's never really...
It's an abstraction.
Yeah, aye. The seasons are abstractions. I think it's important to have another soup kitchen in George Square that Anonymous Glasgow were doing. It was actually Anonymous Glasgow that had one of their 48-hour soup kitchens and shot in, I think, the day after they finished that was when Tent Town began and the dictator seen, well, he obviously seen there was a way to make some sort of money and exploit homeless people, because they could see that homeless people were depending on the soup kitchen for some nourishment and for company, not to be alone. And he's seen that, and he's seen that's my way in, and I can exploit them. So I think another soup kitchen, not necessarily by Anonymous Glasgow. I wouldn't put the onus in any one group. I think it's anyone that was involved in Tent Town. I think they would be the first people to call on, let's come back together. And as much as Tent Town was not planned as a sustained project, it was just something that had to be upheld for what it was providing the homeless people. I think a 48-hour soup kitchen in George Square again, by the folk that were involved in Tent Town, I would say let's get it together and let's do that, because we can plan it. No one needs to do 48-hour shifts because they don't know who's coming and going to relieve them of any duties or whatever. We can say, look, if we can see who's available at what times, and say, okay, if you can only commit, say, so many hours, let's just do that and make it happen again, because then that means that it's already in the public's mind that they may have caught wind of it Tent Town. Now they'll be a bit more aware because we've flyered about it. We've done interviews about it that have went online and across the radio. I think awareness is building, and the more folks see it, I think that's going to build more on the public psyche that this is a thing that is done to raise awareness. And on top of that, it's been done to point the finger at the council again, says, look, they're not doing the things that they would otherwise say they're committed to, and they're corrupt. So I think that would be a good thing going forward, and that gets people more involved again. And the more you can bring people back, or not so much the more you can bring people back, but the more that people want to come back.
And about building on things that have already happened.
Yeah.
To keep the history going.
Yeah, to keep it going historically, and because that allows you to then point it as being a concrete event that took place and it worked. I mean, there's so much to take away from Tent Town. The fact that people got together that didn't really know each other, made friends. The people that stayed as residents at Tent Town, the amount of people that came up to different folk that volunteered to help them, that said to them, they would say either, I've not taken this substance, I've not drank for this amount of time because I've been here and I've got involved and I feel better about myself. Yeah, I mean, if the more that you can keep people involved and as a sustained interest to them, that, you know, if you can give to other people your sincerity that you want this to happen for them and for anyone else that you don't know because you've not met yet, that would also benefit from it. If you can instill that confidence in people that you're there to help, which has to begin with yourself. I mean, if you're not sincere to yourself about why you're doing it, then you can only really give a very superficial impression to folk otherwise, like the council, I suppose.
So I'll ask you, what was the main thing that you've learned through this?
The main thing, I suppose, is communication. It's something that really lacks in this city, I found, and around this country, but I found it more so in Glasgow, maybe because I'm here more than anywhere else. I think the thing I've learned is that to try and be honest with everyone, because not everyone's got it figured out and not everyone sees clearly what the situation is. We've almost got a commitment to each other to be open. I mean, it hurts because you have an idea of yourself that's, that's probably a lot more gallus than you'll probably find other people have of you. So it can be painful, but at the same time, it's just kind of liberating that you kind of find out a truth about yourself by talking to other people. And so I think we've got a commitment to each other to be honest and open about what the situation is like for each other and each of our perspectives, and only then can we put them all together to find out more about the situation and go forward and surpass what difficulty it is that we face. Yeah. So communication, definitely. Don't get me wrong, I mean, there's some things better not said, but I think we could definitely be more honest with each other.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
No worries, my pleasure.